Durbin.
Assalamu alaikum. I want to thank Hassan Banna for those kind words and his outstanding work as Secretary General of the Islamic Society of North America. My thanks to Azhar Aziz for inviting me to speak today and for his leadership of the presidency of the Islamic Society. And to all of you, first, welcome to Illinois, welcome to Chicago and Rosemont. As was said 53 years ago, a group of Muslim students came to the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and held their first convention. Today, more than 5 decades later, the Islamic Society of North America's mission is still guided by its founding principles: truthfulness, tolerance. Sadly, these same principles we find lacking many times in the American political conversation today. Before I get to that particular issue, I want to commend the Islamic Society of North America for opening its doors to Syrian refugees today free of charge. This is an important recognition of the most serious humanitarian challenge in the world and could not come at a more important time. It was 1 year ago this day that Alan Kurdi, a 3-year-old Syrian boy, drowned in the Mediterranean Sea. We will never forget that image once you've seen that photograph. The picture of his little lifeless body broke our hearts, shocked the world. 1 year later, Syrian children are still dying, and we are still facing the greatest refugee crisis since World War II. This week, I'm pleased to announce the Obama administration will meet the President's commitment to admit 10,000 Syrian refugees to the United States this year. I led a letter signed by 27 senators calling for the President to reach this goal. But I hope you agree with me that America and the world can and must do more. For years, my friend and one of my heroes, Dr. Mohammed Salul of Chicago, has joined Syrian American doctors, risking his life to save the victims of war in Syria. When he comes back from these missions, he asks for a meeting and shares with me heartbreaking photographs of infants maimed and killed in that conflict. None of us can rest until this ghastly war in Syria comes to an end. Now, I know the theme of your convention is turning points, and there is no better way to face America's election but to ask for a turning point. America is at a turning point, and this fall, America will have a choice. We can give in to the politics of fear and division, or we can stand up together and say no to hateful bigotry that has dominated too much of the presidential debate. Last year, I said that we had a long way to go when it came to rooting out discrimination and intolerance targeting the Muslim American community. Sadly, this year it's worse. Earlier this year, President Obama said, and I quote him, "You've seen too often people conflating the horrific acts of terrorism with the beliefs of an entire faith. Of course, recently we've heard inexcusable political rhetoric against Muslim Americans that has no place in our country. No surprise then that threats and harassment of Muslim Americans have surged." The President is right. During the presidential election season, the Republican nominee has called for banning Muslims from entering the United States. He wants to strongly consider closing mosques and force citizens to register with the authorities, creating a database of American Muslims. He has said, and I quote, "Islam hates us." And he has suggested that American Muslims are conspiring with terrorists, saying Muslims know who the bad apples are where the bad seeds are, and they don't report them. I could go on and on, but I will not. His words are disgusting and dangerous. It is reprehensible to blame millions of innocent, patriotic American Muslims for the wrongdoing of a few. It is a cheap, shabby corruption of the principle of justice. These comments do not reflect the vital role that millions of Muslim Americans play. American Muslims are teachers, doctors, engineers, police officers, first responders, and, as Khizr and Ghazala Khan powerfully reminded us, they are members of the United States Armed Forces who are willing to risk their lives to defend this great nation. The hateful rhetoric coming out of the presidential campaign does more than embarrass us. In December 2015, after there was talk of closing mosques and banning Muslims, violence against Muslims in America escalated. There were almost 53 incidents of anti-Muslim violence in December alone, up from 35 the previous month. 9 months earlier, before the presidential election began, there were only 2. Between March 2015 and March 2016, a recent report cites 180 incidents of anti-Muslim violence, including 12 murders, 34 physical assaults, 56 acts of vandalism, 9 arsons, 8 shootings and bombings. The rise in anti-Muslim rhetoric from the presidential campaign and the followers of one candidate has led to increasing violence against Muslim Americans. Those that engage in such rhetoric and declare Muslims as the enemy only give political cover to those who harbor bigotry and hate in their hearts. They also play into our real enemy's warped views of the United States. It was the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, James Comey, who said recently, quote, "The notion that the U.S. is anti-Muslim is part of ISIL's narrative and Al-Qaeda's narrative." Well, enough is enough. There is no place in America for those who would divide our nation on race or religion. Students of history know that many of our nation's founders fled religious persecution and placed great importance on religious freedom. My mother was an immigrant to this country. She was brought here at the age of 2 from Lithuania. My grandmother, whom I never knew, brought with her a Catholic prayer book that had been banned in Lithuania by the Russians who were occupying that country. My grandmother knew that she could bring that to the United States of America and have the freedom to practice her religion, her way, without fear of discrimination. Because she knew, she may not have known the words, but she knew in her heart what George Washington had said before. In this land of equal liberty, it is our boast that a man's religious tenets will not forfeit the protection of the laws. And that view by the first President of the United States is enshrined in the First Amendment to our Constitution. But throughout our history, many religious minorities have faced discrimination. Often, waves of prejudice have been directed at the religions of recent immigrants. Today, it is the American Muslims who are facing this discrimination. After the 9/11 terrorist attacks, in fear and anger, some Americans wrongly struck out at innocent Muslim Americans. Now, I had many differences with Republican President George W. Bush. I could list them, but I won't. But I will never forget, at that moment in history, after 9/11, the leadership that he showed when he made it clear to all of Americans, unequivocally clear, this Republican president said, our war was with the terrorists who perverted the teachings of Islam, not with Muslims who were faithful to what he called, and I quote, a faith based upon love, not hate. What a contrast with that statement and what we hear today from the Republican nominee, where President Bush calmed the fears and quelled the hatred in our country after 9/11, this candidate feeds the beast of bigotry and appeals to mankind's worst instincts. After 9/11, the United States Congress also spoke. I joined in a bipartisan resolution with Republican Senator John Sununu, the only Arab American in the Senate, and condemned anti-Muslim, anti-Arab bigotry. And this resolution said that American Muslims are vibrant, peaceful, law-abiding, and have greatly contributed to America's society. That resolution, enacted after 9/11, passed overwhelmingly in the chambers of Congress. Why today are so many members of Congress and members of the United States Senate stepping back and not addressing the harangues and the hateful rhetoric that are coming from some candidates? Earlier this decade, we saw another wave of anti-Muslim rhetoric and discrimination. In 2011, I chaired the first ever congressional hearing on civil rights of American Muslims, which documented an alarming increase in anti-Muslim bigotry. But there's good news. The American people, not Donald Trump, will have the last word. Together, we will decide America's future. And I believe that love will trump hate, courage will trump fear, and tolerance will trump bigotry. You are all critical to these conversations, and together you can have a tremendous impact on America's future. An often quoted hadith refers to the following quote from the great prophet Muhammad, and I quote, "Whosoever of you sees an evil action, he must change it with his hand. If he is not able to do so, then he must change it with his tongue. If he is not able to do so, then with his heart. And this is the weakest manifestation of faith." This November, you will have the power to use your hand to pull a lever when you vote. You will have the power to use your tongue to speak to your friends and family and urge them to vote. And your heart to be optimistic as we work for a brighter future for this nation and the world. Whatever your political party, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, I hope you will vote and support candidates of either political party who are willing to stand up and denounce the dangerous rhetoric that we hear against Muslim Americans, Latinos, the disabled, and so many other groups. And I hope you'll tell your friends and family to do the same. If we support candidates that embody the very principles of this organization, I believe America's future will be in good hands. So let me close by saying, in February, the Islamic Society of North America's headquarters in Plainfield, Indiana, was defaced with racial epithets and anti-Muslim slurs. How did that community in the Midwest react to that act of hate? They came out. They stood shoulder to shoulder. Christians, Jews, Protestants, non-believers, Muslims, in solidarity condemning this attack. We shouldn't expect anything different in the United States of America. After all, true Islam is not rooted in hate and violence, but love and mercy. And the true democracy of America is rooted in freedom and justice. Keep up your good work. Thank you all very much.